Some of these critics, these pundits,
I absolutely adore them lads. I have unbelievable time for them, but they're a great bunch, but it's not acceptable.
They'd like to play the hard man when they're on it. It's not very pleasant when you're trying to manage a team. All you're looking for is a bit of civility and a bit of decency, but they just miss you like you know, you have nothing to do with the bloody occasion.
Quick picks. Will O'Callaghan, what's happening?
Morning, Adrian.
Only the two of us this morning. We've Johnny for company here as well. What's happening?
How are you?
Do you know how you know it's a bank holiday weekend without telling someone it's a bank holiday weekend, lads? It's the fact that Adrian and I are the only two left standing to actually make the quick picks on this Friday. That all the young folk from the office are away at music festivals and so on for the weekend. Well, it just got me and AB.
Actually, is Tailteann this weekend or next weekend?
It is this weekend.
It's clearly will that they're all like, you know, it's the last kind of prep for Tailteann, and that's actually the reason why, as opposed to they're all. So I'd like to defend their honour there very briefly.
Well, to be fair now, Tommy was like wowing Castlebar last night with his first ever the Football Pod Live show with Paddy and James and Keith Higgins. So there is that. We'll give him a bit of a pass for that.
Wowing so much that he couldn't take a Skype call from a hotel room.
Oh, I'd say Tommy is in Clough-Cuckooland right now. I would imagine that from some of the messages I was getting at about 3:30, 4 o'clock.
Oof. Yeah, I'd say should have gotten him on.
I'd say he's needing his lie-in. Right, we've no leaderboard, Will, so let's just assume that I did really well last week. And
we're both doing really well, Adrian.
Absolutely.
That's the key.
So well. Right, we'll get straight into it then. Obviously, a couple of the provincial hurling finals stuck ahead, so we're going to kick off, I think, with the Leinster hurling final. It's Galway against Kilkenny, and it's fairly well split here. Owen, Will and Tommy are all going for Galway, and then you've Aisling and myself who are going for Kilkenny. And I'm torn on a couple of these games this weekend, I have to say, and I think that we can make arguments now as to which way we're going to fall, but ultimately there is a cigarette paper between a lot of these. And the main reason, Will, I was thinking about that one particularly, this sounds slightly odd, but I was listening to the preview with Tommy Welsh on during the week. He was finding it hard. He went for Galway in the end. He was saying that he thought Kilkenny were a good team, but just lacking in form at the minute. So look, you take that as it is. I just felt the sight of Croke Park for a Kilkenny team, the handshake is back into play, you know. He will want to get one over. Look, I know that some of the same things will apply for Galway, and they are shorter odds to win the All-Ireland than Kilkenny, and maybe that's the biggest
How can the handshake influence like Kilkenny's
I do think
motivation?
that it focuses the minds. It will focus the minds in a way for Brian Cody in a way that it may not have mattered very much for Henry Shefflin.
But he dictated the handshake. It's like Shefflin. All of the onus here is on Shefflin. Does he basically? I did a piece with Charlie Carter for the match programme tomorrow, and Charlie Carter's like, "Will they even shake hands at all?" And he's like, Brian Cody completely dictated the narrative of that. He pulled him back, and it's more how Shefflin reacts rather than Cody. I think
Cody was, look, not to rehash the whole thing, but Cody was annoyed by it to the point where he pulled him back.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying, that's the bit where Shefflin is like, oh, I don't really care if you want to shake hands.
So you think Shefflin emerged better in the handshake than...
I think there's no doubt about it. I think that it didn't reflect amazingly on Cody. There was it felt like a bit of an ego thing, him going, you show me some respect here. Now look at, who knows, maybe he comes out and explains it all.
This has no relevance to the outcome of this game, though. Hurling is extremely professional. It has no relevance in the outcome of the game, surely.
They will
or the motivation in
shake hands, I think, as well. Look, we don't want to spend the entire slot talking about whether
you
shake
think, Will?
A complete sideshow, lads, is what the handshake is going to be. At some point, they will definitely shake hands.
They will.
I think you won't have the emotionally charged moment that we had in Salt Hill when Kilkenny had just lost to a very late controversial free when it looked like they'd rescued a draw. And look, I mean, my take on it would be that Henry Shefflin was definitely trying to walk back towards the sideline. Brian Cody was trying to get towards the officials. And there was a very strange moment, and we can read whatever we want into how much emotion was there for Brian Cody about the idea of Henry Shefflin going elsewhere and trying to damage his native county's chances of winning silverware this year. So, look, the handshake is the handshake, but what is going to matter is what happens in the 70-plus minutes on the pitch.
Kind of like meeting an ex in the bar where, like, she didn't quite see you, and it was an acrimonious breakup, and she's just a naturally positive person, and she gives you like but then she sees you, she's like, oh, God, I don't like you, and then kind of...
Hypothetically.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. You talk about reading too much into things that maybe don't matter, but looking at the league might be somewhat of a pointless exercise. But the second quarter, the last day from Galway, will they were devastating, obviously, over that period of time. So, and it's hard to know, sort of post that, did they take the foot off the gas? Did they think, okay, we've got this, and they sort of eased off a bit? Or is there a weakness there that Kilkenny ultimately had figured out and identified and can make them pay for this weekend?
No, I think we had a pretty vintage Kilkenny performance in the closing stages in Salt Hill, where they went chasing goals, got one, looked like that goal was going to be enough to rescue them a point in the round robin section. Since then, though, things have changed a little bit. I mean, Kilkenny's performance against Wexford was very worrying, because Galway are going to put a lot of pressure onto Kilkenny. And when the pressure came in for Kilkenny against Wexford, they started to revert back to type somewhat. They've been trying to switch to a game that's a little bit more varied, lads. And particularly, they've been doing a lot more short passing earlier this season. And then they went back to going incredibly long and ineffective against Wexford. They put 16 balls into the Wexford 45 from Kilkenny's own 45, a very long pass, and only 5 of them were retained as Kilkenny possessions. They went back to very old school Kilkenny when the pressure was on. Now, Galway will lap that up if it happens, because Galway like to defend deep, and they're going to do so to try and curtail Owen Cody's pace particularly. And then they've got a really physical back six. So Galway would be more than happy if ball rains in on the Macrow Park. So Kilkenny will have to have a little bit more about their attack, and they'll have to get better at keeping the ball in possession. The team who suffered the most turnovers in the round robin section in Leinster and Munster were not Laois, were not Westmeath, were not Tipperary, who had a bad year. It was Kilkenny who gave away the ball the most on turnovers. So Kilkenny are going to have to be very careful and better with the use of the ball if they're going to win this game. But sometimes we see Kilkenny being really effective, and they're very good at going for goals this year. I think it's 26 shots they've taken, and they've scored 14 goals in the round robin. So they're lethal when they get the ball into scoring zones, but it's just getting the ball into the scoring zones in a more effective way is what Kilkenny have to do. And the other thing that's a big advantage for Galway here is that Hugh Lawler is out with the broken bone that he's got in his hand. So Kilkenny have lost their first choice fullback, and Conor Whelan is in tremendous form at the other end for Galway, and he may well make hay on Delaney if the ball gets into Whelan.
Yeah, and look, I think either way, it won't be. Whoever wins it, it's not going to be an astonishment either way, is it? Clare Limerick is the other one we want to look at in the Munster final. Let's get a sense of which way everybody's gone on this. And is Limerick across the board? I am a little bit surprised by that, because I thought somebody might sort of go the opposite direction. First time, since they've met in a Munster final since 1995. It is written in the stars.
That is mad.
Yeah, things didn't go too badly for Clare in 95, as I recall. I think an 80-year drought for the McCarthy.
Derry hadn't been to an All-Ireland final, an Ulster Championship final since 2000. And it's like, it's mad when in small provinces like that to think that it's 1995. Will, you were what age back then? Like,
I would have been 9, yeah.
9, yeah. There you go.
But the thing is, right, Clare was saying this on the Meaningful Metrics with Nathan last night, is that they're quite used to having long droughts. They've had a 60-year drought, a 15-year drought, a 30-odd-year drought along the way. And here they are now trying to go back and bridge a gap from 1998, which is exactly what the aforementioned Derry did last weekend in Ulster. Clare have been really, really impressive so far this summer. We argued previously in 2019 when they went out in the group stages. We argued again when they went out in the quarter-final the year after in 2020 that they were very reliant on Tony Kelly, and that if you could shut Tony Kelly down, or if Tony Kelly was to pick up an injury, Clare just weren't going to have the scoring charge which was required. Well, this year they've been able to get Shane O'Donnell back, thankfully, after he missed all of last year due to concussion. He's come back in and is such an orchestrator now. He's no longer the finisher when he broke through in 2013. He's far more involved in their general play, and he is a complete mischief maker, and it's going to be very difficult for that Limerick half-back line, who like to hurl quite a bit, to deal with the likes of O'Donnell and Tony Kelly. Like, talk all week, who goes on to Tony Kelly? I know Tommy Welsh was suggesting that maybe Will O'Donoghue drops back. Maybe you put Dermot Burns there and sacrifice what Burns gives you going forward to try and stop Kelly. Such is the respect that's required for a man that scores 12 points a game. Or does potentially Tony Kelly go in and try and be a disruptor and end up in a more conventional 11 position and try and make it difficult for Declan Hannon? Like, these are all really interesting battles going into the weekend. You look at the form of Peter Duggan, who's been playing remarkably well. And then you've got the two best cornerbacks probably in the game right now, with Hayes for Clare, who's probably going to pick up Aaron Gillan, who's Limerick's danger man. And we're going to see possibly who Finn picks up in the Clare forward line. So it's very, very difficult to know how these two teams are going to line up, but we know that Cian Lynch is not going to be involved, and that has to be a boost for Clare. That the guy who basically is the glue that ties everything together, possibly the brain of the forward line for Limerick, the best hurler of his generation, Cian Lynch, is not available this weekend due to his hamstring strain. That has to give a bit of hope to a Clare team who've been shooting the lights out so far. They're averaging 32 points a game, absolutely hammered Waterford, the league champions, last time out, even without John Conlon, who's been playing so well, and without Tony Kelly. I don't know. I think 5 points is a bit disrespectful to Clare going into this game, which is the current handicap going into it. I think if Clare don't win, Clare are going to be closer than 5 points, I think.
I'd said last year that Clare were the closest team to Limerick, and I'm not saying it was laughed out of town. It wasn't a totally implausible thing, but I will admit that by the end of the year I was definitely doubting that call. They got caught by Cork in the qualifiers. There was the late Kelly goal that could have been, that maybe would have changed the narrative for them. But from what we've seen subsequent to that, like in the betting, it's Limerick, Galway, Clare and the rest. We'll see on Sunday. Obviously we'll have a bank of evidence to go on at that point. But you're reading now, Will, are they closer to Limerick? Are they at the same level as Limerick? How do you see that?
They're not that far off Limerick, really. I mean, you go back to the game in Cusack Park a few weeks back in the round robin, and I know that Hegarty was sent off and that affected Limerick's flow somewhat going into the closing stages of the game. But the reality is that Clare were basically blow for blow with Limerick throughout the game. The one thing about Limerick is, though, they found solutions this year, Adrian, when they found themselves in difficult situations. I think back to the Tipperary game where after an hour Limerick weren't hurling particularly well, and then they blew Tipperary out of the water for the last 10 minutes of the game. At times, maybe against Cork, had a poor start, conceded a goal after 40 seconds, yet found a way to dominate that game, particularly in the second half of Páirc Uí Chaoimh. For their injuries and suspensions that they've had this year, having to move players around, they've got a versatile squad, and most importantly, they've got a winning mentality, which is key going into the game at Semple Stadium. So we'll see if Clare can maybe get over that. But again, I just think this one's going to run pretty close. Again, I've picked Limerick. I'm not going to change my mind on that right now. But I think Limerick probably just by a couple of points against Clare on Sunday afternoon.
Let's get into the football. Mayo, Monaghan to begin with, and it's Mayo across the board.
Oh, no.
And look at exactly, and that is exactly the point, because it's another year, Will, where we're all scratching our heads about Mayo. We're not sure where they're at. They've so often obviously run the gauntlet before of back alleys and scraping through against the likes of a Down or Armagh, as they've done a few years ago. Not in the last couple of years, admittedly, obviously, but they've used that time to go away and hone their game and come back a little bit stronger. And part of the Mayo benchmark is obviously, where Galway are at. But increasingly, everybody's saying, well, Galway are live contenders now for the All-Ireland. So where does that leave us? All that in the melting pot. It
leaves me very worried about my prediction, Adrian. Is where it leaves me.
You wishing you could have gone for Monaghan now?
Yeah, I should have probably. But look, Monaghan are a good team. Didn't play particularly well when they were knocked out of the Ulster Championship in the semi-finals. But then again, we subsequently saw that this Derry team is a very, very difficult nut to crack, and they went on to win the Anglo-Celt afterwards. There's part of me that's going exactly down that logic, which is that Mayo, backdoor, they love it. They relish this chance of going the long way around into the All-Ireland series, and there's plenty of evidence to show that Mayo have been able to circle the wagons after having a disappointing start to the year, which was the case when they lost out to Galway. The problem is that you just look at the Mayo injuries, and as the week goes on, it looks like some of those key players are not going to be back for this weekend. You look at the fact that, I watched Monaghan and Mayo in the league, and Monaghan seemed to be a bad matchup for Mayo during that game too. The more this goes on, the more worried I am. And I'm even more worried about my prediction when I see an across the board for Mayo, which I think is probably largely on blind faith. Why are you going for Mayo here, Adrian?
It's blind faith. That's exactly what it is. It should be Mayo is the thing.
Well, a few months ago, they were odds-on favourites to win the All-Ireland.
Yeah, so it should be Mayo. And the thing is, the ceiling of Mayo is higher than the ceiling of Monaghan. And I see Rory Larmer this morning, and good morning to you, Rory. He's giving it the here when he saw the predictions. And look, I hear you. We could all look like absolute fools. But Monaghan are, and Rory will not be delighted to hear this, but they are basically the French rugby team. I mean, not at the minute, but the one we used to know, where they were some weeks they turn up and some weeks they wouldn't. So you don't know what the hell you're getting from Monaghan. The evidence of that is all over the place. So that's not a seat of the pants theory about Monaghan. That's just the way they've been for the last few years. They were predicted to win Ulster and they've come up short. Look at Mayo are exactly the same kettle of fish. So, but my theory, Will, is based on the fact that I think Mayo's ceiling, and the evidence is there, is higher than what Monaghan should be. And when their backs to the wall, they have often previously shown the ability to come out fighting or scrape over the line by a point, which is probably what happened.
So Mayo's ceiling is possibly, say, an All-Ireland finalist, or as Johnny said, an All-Ireland contender. But this weekend, are they going to be at that level? That is the serious question mark that you have for this.
Well, definitely not. They'll obviously, presuming they go on the trajectory you think, they'll improve. It does have a lovely makeup to it though. This is old school. Two very good teams losing, you're out.
Yeah, we'll skip through the last ones here.
Sorry, and two of the biggest fanatical supporters of football in terms of population, Monaghan and Mayo. This is proper football country, and that'll be a proper atmosphere as well.
Armagh Tyrone might be a little bit tasty. I would offer to you, and so it's Tyrone for Owen, Adrian, Aisling, and Will, and wouldn't you know it, the man himself, who hasn't turned up this morning, Tommy, is going for Armagh. There is a case for Armagh, isn't there? Some of it down to. Maybe a lot of it, maybe all of it, down to how bad Tyrone have shown they can be.
Yeah, and look, again, I think for any of us who would be backing Armagh, I had a feeling Tommy Rooney would. I think Tommy Rooney must have Armagh family or something. I'd love to go back through the quick picks and see how often Tommy is actually.
He's like Charlie High, Will. He's
family
from everywhere.
Yeah. Look, again, if he's right, we can use the analogy about a stop clock being right twice a day, because he just backs Armagh every single time almost blindly. But Armagh's early season form was really good. Then it dipped off, and then I kind of got off the Armagh bandwagon about them potentially winning the Ulster Championship. Now we go into a qualifier between two great old rivals going back to the early noughties, where a lot of the players who were on show this weekend were growing up while that rivalry was on. I think Tyrone have to be boosted by the fact that they've brought in a few of their under-20s. They've just come off the back of a really good under-20 campaign. Those bodies are needed because of the sheer amount of players that have left the Tyrone panel. Tyrone have obviously been quite disappointing and were really, really poor when they played against Derry in the Ulster Football Championship. You're wondering whether the champions of last year can just get themselves back together. And this is almost the perfect fixture for them. You're taking on one of your rivals, taking on a neighbour, going up against a team where that everything is on the line. Your season is over. Your All-Ireland defence is over if you lose. That's the main reason that I'm going for Tyrone here, is that I reckon there's another kick left in Tyrone, but they're going to have to try and get a handle on that Armagh full forward line, which has so many scores in it if they actually get going. I really enjoy watching this Armagh team if they get going. Again, I wonder, is this Ciarán McGeeney's last stand with this Armagh team too? And it would be a terrible way for their year to fizzle out when it started so impressively with a win against Dublin and Croke Park if they were to be knocked out on the first weekend of June. So, again, you talk about Mayo and Monaghan being perfectly set up. This one is pretty mouthwatering.
Interesting you say that briefly. The McGeeney thing, he's been managing for so long now, and he's one of these divisive characters in terms of management, I think, where I think a lot of the players really buy into what he's doing, but his record obviously is questionable. You think this could be a seminal day in his career?
Yeah, it's huge. Obviously, if Armagh win, you've knocked out the reigning All-Ireland champions and they go into round 2 of the qualifiers, and you're, that step closer to getting back into the All-Ireland series this year because of the Tailteann Cup means that we're cut down to the fact that you're going into the last 8 in the country, effectively, if you can get through in the qualifiers. So it's not going to be a long run through the qualifiers. That's the other thing about Mayo, is that they're only going to have a few games to come through this time if they're to come through the back door. I'd agree that McGeeney can be divisive, particularly among supporters, but the one thing that I found very telling about Ciarán McGeeney is I remember talking to some of the Kildare players after he left, and they were devastated that he left Kildare. The feeling was that he really had them in fantastic condition, that he was an excellent coach, he was someone that they hugely respected. He's got Armagh generally on an upward trajectory as well, but this is obviously a very difficult game for Armagh to try and win this weekend, and I'm sure Geezer himself and probably the Armagh County Board would have a think if they were knocked out of the championship early this year.
We'll skip through the last couple of here. Leitrim Sligo to begin with. We have Leitrim for Owen, Will and Tommy, and then Aisling and myself are going for Sligo, and then we have the last one on the football from Anna and Cavan, and Cavan across the board. I don't know, maybe great surprise about that. Are we doing Joe McDonagh? Did we decide we were doing Joe McDonagh? There was some chat about Joe McDonagh.
I think we definitely should have people put in. I think that Leitrim Sligo game, by the way, in the Tailteann Cup is exactly what the Tailteann Cup was made for. A derby in the quarterfinals, Croke Park on the line, Leitrim on the back of a really good result against Antrim last weekend, Sligo on a bit of a run. I think this is going to be their 5th championship game for this year. And yeah, Cavan have taken the Tailteann Cup really seriously, Adrian, and they are probably the pedigree team left in the competition, even though they're coming out of Division 4. So I'm all for a Cavan Offaly final if this was to happen. But yeah, Cavan are really, really good. I expect them to win. Yeah. Tailteann Cup, I know if the guys didn't put in, I'm going for Antrim over Kerry. I don't read a huge amount into the last game in the round robin where Stephen Gleeson was able to rest some of his players against Kerry. Kerry obviously did quite impressively to get to the final because they were in a difficult position going into the last round. They needed Carlow to beat Offaly and also to win away from home against Antrim, which on the face of it looked pretty pretty unlikely, but Stephen Malumphey's side pulled it around. I thought they were going to be out of contention after they lost to Offaly at home in the penultimate round. But this Antrim team have done really well this year, with the exception of one game, the defeat that they suffered against Laois away from home. Outside of that, they've won when it's mattered. The relegation playoff against Offaly, they were really impressive up until the last game, where they were able to rest players against Kerry in the round robin of this competition. So for me, the Saffrons to lift the Joe McDonagh for the second time in 3 years.
Yeah, happy to go with that. Will, fair play. Good man. Thanks for turning up.
Cheers, lads.